All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into employee engagement strategies, but with a bit of a twist.
Oh, a twist, you say?
We're going to the Middle East. Specifically, we'll be focusing on Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Jordan.
That's a fascinating region to explore, especially when it comes to employee engagement.
It is, and to guide our deep dive, we're going to be looking at ProtajHR Consulting, a company that really seems to have a handle on this area.
Interesting. I'm not too familiar with them. Tell me more.
Well, their website is a goldmine of information, and what struck me right away is their emphasis on tailored solutions.
Ah, so they get that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to employee engagement.
Exactly, especially in a region as diverse as the Middle East. You can't just copy and paste what works in, say, the U.S. or Europe.
Right. The cultural nuances, economic realities, even corporate cultures within each of those countries are so distinct, it'd be naive to think a generic approach would cut it.
And they're not just paying lip service to this idea of tailored solutions either. They've got a whole suite of services designed to address specific aspects of employee engagement, starting with their comprehensive employee engagement surveys.
I'm all ears.
They talk about uncovering deep insights and obtaining actionable data to improve the workplace environment, and it all sounds very strategic and data-driven, which I love.
It is, and it's not just about gathering data for the sake of it. ProtajHR surveys are designed to unearth very specific pain points and opportunities that might be unique to the Middle Eastern context.
Give me an example.
Well, think about it. Work-life balance expectations in these countries are often influenced by strong family obligations.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Leadership preferences, too, might be tied to cultural hierarchies that are different from what we see in other parts of the world, so you need to account for that.
Wow, that's fascinating. So it's not just about asking, are you happy at work? It's about delving into the very specific cultural factors that influence employee perceptions and experiences.
Precisely. And this granular level of insight allows ProtajHR to develop truly customized strategies.
Can you give me a real-world example? How would that customization play out in practice?
Sure. They might discover, for instance, that in Saudi Arabia, recognition programs focused on professional development opportunities are more effective than monetary bonuses.
Makes sense.
But then in the UAE, public acknowledgement might be highly valued, so a totally different approach is needed.
That's a really concrete example of how cultural nuances can impact something as seemingly straightforward as employee recognition. It seems like ProtajHR has a deep understanding of these nuances, which is probably why they're so successful.
Absolutely. And their commitment to tailoring solutions extends to all of their services.
Like what?
Well, take leadership development, for instance. ProtajHR focuses on equipping leaders with strategic skills, yes, but also with the cultural intelligence needed to thrive in the Middle East.
So it's not just about teaching leadership skills in a vacuum. It's about understanding how those skills need to be adapted and applied within a specific cultural context. What would that look like in practice?
Let's say you have a leader who is used to a very collaborative, flat organizational structure.
Okay.
They might need to adjust their approach when working in the Middle East, where hierarchy and respect for authority are often deeply ingrained in the culture.
Right. So you can't just assume that a leadership style that works in one culture will automatically translate to another.
Exactly, and ProtajHR seems to really get that. Another thing they do well is performance management.
Tell me more.
Well, they have these performance management programs that seem to go beyond generic goal setting and feedback. I think they factor in the cultural nuances we've been discussing.
How so?
Like, for example, recognizing that direct feedback, while common in some cultures, might be perceived as confrontational in others.
That's a great point. So if you're working with a team in the Middle East, it's crucial to establish how feedback will be given and received in a way that respects cultural norms.
Absolutely. Clear communication and expectation setting from the get-go are key.
Makes sense. And it sounds like this emphasis on cultural sensitivity extends to their employee recognition and rewards programs as well.
Oh, for sure. They seem to understand that what motivates employees in one culture might not translate to another.
Like you're saying how public acknowledgement might be awesome in the UAE, but in a more collectivist culture, it could be seen as boastful or inappropriate.
Exactly. It's those subtle but crucial differences that ProtajHR seems to be attuned to, and it shows in their approach to cultural transformation, too.
Ah, their cultural transformation programs. That sounds pretty intense. What exactly do they entail?
So essentially, they work with organizations to align their company culture with their strategic goals, but with a keen awareness of the Middle Eastern context.
I see. So it's not about imposing a westernized corporate culture. It's about finding a way to bridge the gap between global business practices and local cultural values.
Exactly. They're helping companies navigate the complexities of creating a cohesive and inclusive work environment in a region that's experiencing such rapid economic and social change.
Makes sense. They're like cultural translators in a way, helping companies speak the right language to their employees in the Middle East.
It's a great analogy.
Now, speaking of cultural understanding, there's something else on their website that caught my eye in their news and articles section.
Oh.
Yeah, and it's not even the articles themselves at first. It's the publishing dates, August 25th and September 27th, 2024. Both articles were published on those dates. I'm curious, any thoughts on why those specific dates might be significant?
That is interesting. It's hard to say for sure without more information.
Yeah, it's kind of a mystery.
I mean, it's possible those dates are tied to a planned content calendar, or maybe they coincide with industry events or conferences specific to the Middle East.
True, but what really got me thinking are the article titles themselves. Things like aligning hearts and minds, the impact of culture activation on organizational success, and cultural playbook essentials, how to activate and sustain a cohesive company culture. This culture activation seems like a key theme for ProtajHR.
It is, and culture activation goes beyond simply having a company culture.
Right.
It's about intentionally bringing that culture to life in tangible ways, making sure it's not just words on a page.
I'm intrigued. What would that look like in the context of the Middle East?
Well, it might involve adapting communication styles, leadership approaches, or even office layouts to align with local cultural values, for example.
Ah, so it's not just about having a mission statement on the wall. It's about embodying those values in every aspect of the workplace experience.
Exactly, and ProtajHR is helping companies in the Middle East do just that, bringing their culture to life in a way that resonates with their employees.
It's like they're helping companies translate their values into a language that their employees in the Middle East can understand and connect with.
Exactly, and that's essential for creating a truly engaged and thriving workforce in this region.
Now, I'm curious to know more about this culture activation. Could you give a specific example of how ProtajHR might help a company bring its culture to life in a tangible way in the Middle East? Let's say a company really values open communication and collaboration. How would that play out in a region where hierarchy and respect for authority are so important?
That's a great question. So in a Western context, that value of open communication might translate to open plan offices and informal brainstorming sessions.
Right, the kind of thing we see a lot in Silicon Valley.
Exactly. But in the Middle East, that approach might not be as effective. It could even be counterproductive.
Because it clashes with those cultural values around hierarchy and respect.
Right. So ProtajHR might suggest adapting this value to the local context, maybe by creating more structured forums for feedback and idea sharing.
So you're still encouraging open communication, but you're doing it in a way that respects the existing cultural norms.
Precisely. It's about finding that sweet spot where global values and local practices intersect.
And that's where ProtajHR's expertise really shines. They know how to bridge that gap in a way that feels authentic and effective.
Absolutely. They get that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to culture activation.
And that brings us back to their emphasis on tailored solutions. It seems like this is the thread that runs through all of their services, whether it's employee engagement surveys, leadership development, or cultural transformation programs.
Definitely. ProtajHR recognizes that the key to success in the Middle East is to be both strategic and culturally sensitive.
And they're giving companies the tools and the know-how to do just that.
Exactly.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground in terms of understanding ProtajHR's overall approach, but now I want to zoom in on a specific aspect of employee engagement that's really important to me: well-being.
Great topic, and one that's increasingly relevant in today's world.
It is, and I think it's especially important in the Middle East, a region that's going through so much change and development.
I agree. The rapid pace of change can be both exciting and stressful, so it's crucial for companies to prioritize employee well-being.
Absolutely. Now, I know ProtajHR touches on well-being in their materials, but I'm curious to get your take on this. How do you see well-being fitting into the broader picture of employee engagement, especially in the Middle Eastern context?
Well, I think well-being is absolutely foundational to employee engagement.
Tell me more.
You can't have truly engaged employees if they're not feeling well, both physically and mentally.
Right. It's like trying to build a house on a shaky foundation. It's just not going to be stable.
Exactly. And I think this is especially true in the Middle East, where the lines between work and personal life can be more blurred.
Oh, yeah. Family and community ties are so strong there. It's not like in some Western cultures where you can just clock out at 5 p.m. and forget about work until the next morning.
Right, so companies need to be mindful of that and create a work environment that supports employees' overall well-being, not just their productivity.
Okay, so we've established that employee well-being is crucial. But I'm wondering, how do we actually define well-being? It seems like such a broad and multifaceted concept. Is there a universal definition that we can use?
It is a broad concept, and it can be tough to pin down a single definition that everyone agrees on.
So how do we even begin to approach it?
Well, I think it's helpful to think of well-being as encompassing all aspects of a person's health and happiness, not just their physical health.
Okay, so it's about mental, emotional, and social well-being too, right?
Exactly. It's about feeling good physically, mentally, and emotionally.
And having strong social connections and a sense of purpose.
Precisely. It's about feeling fulfilled and thriving in all areas of life.
Now, you mentioned that there's no one-size-fits-all definition of well-being, so I'm assuming that this concept might look different in the Middle East compared to other parts of the world.
Absolutely. What contributes to well-being in one culture might not be the same in another.
Can you give me some examples? How might those cultural differences play out when it comes to well-being?
Well, for instance, strong family ties are a cornerstone of many Middle Eastern cultures, so having a supportive family network would likely be a significant contributor to well-being in this region.
Makes sense.
Whereas in more individualistic cultures, personal achievements and independence might be more highly valued when it comes to well-being.
So it's about understanding what matters most to people in a given culture and how those values contribute to their overall sense of well-being.
Exactly.
Now this brings us back to ProtajHR and their work in the Middle East. Do they address this cultural variation in their approach to employee well-being?
Well, their website doesn't explicitly delve into the specifics of how their approach to well-being is tailored to each country.
Mm-hmm.
But based on their overall philosophy of customized solutions, we can assume that they take those cultural nuances into account when developing their strategies.
Right, so they're probably not just implementing a generic well-being program across the board.
No, they're likely gathering data on employee needs and preferences in each country and then tailoring their approach accordingly.
That makes sense. Now I'm curious, what are some specific examples of how ProtajHR might tailor their well-being initiatives to the Middle Eastern context? What are some things that they might do differently compared to a company operating in, say, the U.S. or Europe?
Well, one area where we might see differences is in the types of benefits offered.
Go on.
For example, in the Middle East, companies might be more likely to offer benefits that support family well-being.
Such as?
Things like generous parental leave policies, subsidized childcare, or even elder care assistance.
So it's about recognizing that employees' well-being is often intertwined with the well-being of their families.
Exactly, and supporting those family needs can go a long way in boosting employee morale and loyalty.
Now, beyond benefits, are there other ways that ProtajHR might tailor their well-being initiatives?
Absolutely. They might also focus on creating a work environment that is sensitive to the cultural and religious practices of their employees in the Middle East.
That's so important. Can you give me some examples?
Well, for instance, they might offer prayer rooms for Muslim employees, or they might be flexible with work schedules during Ramadan.
So it's about being mindful of those religious observances and creating a workplace where employees feel respected and accommodated.
Exactly. It's about creating a sense of belonging and inclusivity.
Now, this makes me think about another aspect of well-being that's often overlooked. Work-life balance.
Oh, absolutely. That's a huge one, especially in today's always connected world.
It is, and I think it's particularly relevant in the Middle East where there's such a strong emphasis on family and community.
I agree. It's not uncommon for people in the Middle East to have significant family obligations outside of work.
So companies can't just expect employees to compartmentalize their lives and focus solely on work during business hours.
Nope. They need to be more flexible and understanding.
Now, how do you think ProtajHR might approach work-life balance in the Middle East? What are some strategies that they might recommend to their clients?
Well, I imagine they would encourage companies to offer flexible work arrangements.
Such as?
Things like telecommuting, flex time, or compressed work weeks.
So giving employees more control over their schedules and allowing them to better integrate their work and personal lives.
Exactly. And they might also encourage companies to promote a culture that values work-life balance.
What would that look like in practice?
It could involve things like discouraging after-hours emails or encouraging employees to take their vacation time.
So it's about setting clear boundaries and expectations around work hours.
And creating a culture where it's okay to prioritize personal time.
I like that. It's about shifting the mindset from work comes first to well-being comes first.
Exactly. And I think that shift is essential for creating a truly sustainable and fulfilling work environment.
Well said. Now, I know we've been focusing on the Middle East, but I'm wondering, are these insights about well-being transferable to other parts of the world?
Absolutely. The principles of well-being are universal.
So even though the specific ways in which we support well-being might differ across cultures, the underlying goal is the same.
Exactly. It's about creating a workplace where people can thrive, both personally and professionally.
I love that. It's about recognizing that employees are whole people with lives outside of work, and those lives matter.
They do, and supporting employees' well-being is not just the right thing to do, it's also good for business.
How so?
Well, when employees are feeling well, they're more engaged, more productive, and more likely to stay with the company.
So it's a win-win for everyone involved.
Exactly. It's about creating a virtuous cycle where well-being drives engagement and engagement drives success.
I like that it's a powerful reminder that investing in employee well-being is not just an expense, it's an investment.
It is. It's an investment in your people and ultimately an investment in the future of your company.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground in terms of understanding the importance of well-being, but I'm wondering, what does all of this mean for someone like you, deeply interested in the Middle Eastern market? What should we be paying attention to here?
Well, ProtajHR's success highlights a crucial point.
What's it?
Understanding the nuances of culture is paramount in this region. It's not enough to simply replicate what works elsewhere.
Right. We've established that one size doesn't fit all.
Exactly. Companies need to be willing to adapt their approach, their communication styles, even their understanding of concepts like leadership and well-being to align with the unique cultural context of the Middle East.
That's a powerful takeaway. Seems like ProtajHR is leading the charge in showing companies how to do this effectively. But while they offer a lot of insights, I'm noticing a gap in their materials.
Oh, what's that?
Well, they talk a lot about tailoring solutions to the Middle East as a region, but I'm curious about the variations within these countries.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, like would the same well-being strategy work for someone in Dubai versus, say, Riyadh?
That's a brilliant question. It highlights that even within a tailored solutions approach, further tailoring might be needed.
You think so?
Absolutely. While there are shared cultural values across the Middle East, each country has its own unique social fabric, economic landscape, and even corporate culture.
So you'd have two employees in the same company, both working in the Middle East, but their needs and expectations can be completely different.
Exactly. What motivates a young professional in Dubai's fast-paced tech scene might be very different from what matters to a seasoned executive in Saudi Arabia's more traditional business environment.
So even with a nuanced approach, there's always more nuance to uncover. This makes me appreciate ProtajHR's focus on data-driven insights even more.
Me too.
Those employee engagement surveys could be incredibly valuable for revealing those subtle but critical differences in employee needs and expectations.
Precisely. By gathering data on employee well-being, companies can identify the specific factors that are most important to their workforce, whether that's work-life balance, career growth, or recognition, and tailor their strategies accordingly.
So it's not just about having a generic well-being program. It's about understanding what well-being actually means to your employees in their specific context.
Exactly. It's about listening to your employees, understanding their unique needs and challenges, and creating a workplace that supports their overall well-being.
This brings us back to the importance of communication and feedback, doesn't it? We can't just assume we know what our employees need. We have to ask them and be open to hearing what they have to say.
Absolutely. Regular check-ins, pulse surveys, focus groups, these are all valuable tools for gathering employee feedback and ensuring that your well-being initiatives are truly meeting their needs.
Now, if we connect this back to ProtajHR's broader approach to employee engagement,
it becomes clear that well-being is not just a separate program, it's woven into the fabric of their entire strategy.
I like that analogy. It's like well-being is the thread that connects all of their other initiatives, from leadership development to performance management to career development.
Exactly. It's the foundation upon which a truly engaged and thriving workforce is built. And in a region as diverse and dynamic as the Middle East, that foundation needs to be strong and adaptable.
Okay, so we've established that employee well-being is a crucial element of engagement. and that it needs to be tailored to the specific cultural context.
Right.
But I'm wondering, how do we actually measure well-being? Seems like such a subjective concept.
Yeah, it can be challenging to measure something that feels so personal.
It is. So
Yeah.
how do companies even begin to quantify something like well-being?
Well, there are actually several tools and approaches that companies can use.
Oh, like what?
One common approach is to use surveys that ask employees about their levels of stress, happiness, job satisfaction, and work-life balance.
So those employee engagement surveys that ProtajHR specializes in.
Exactly. Those can provide valuable insights into how employees are feeling and what areas need improvement when it comes to their well-being.
So it's about getting a pulse on how employees are doing emotionally and mentally, not just physically.
You got it. Well-being encompasses all aspects of a person's health and happiness, so it's important to measure it holistically.
And what about beyond surveys? Are there other ways to gauge well-being?
Definitely. Companies can also look at metrics like absenteeism rates, employee turnover, and even healthcare costs.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought about those.
Yeah, those can all be indicators of employee well-being or lack thereof.
So even if you don't have fancy surveys, you can still get a sense of employee well-being by looking at existing data.
Exactly. And by tracking these metrics over time, companies can see how their well-being initiatives are impacting their workforce.
Can you give me an example? How would that play out in real life?
Sure, let's say a company implements a flexible work policy.
Okay.
If they then see that absenteeism rates decrease after implementing that policy, that's a good sign that the policy is having a positive impact on employee well-being.
Ah, so they're using data to track the effectiveness of their well-being initiatives.
Exactly. It's about using data to make informed decisions and ensure that your efforts are actually making a difference.
That's really helpful. It gives companies a way to assess the effectiveness of their efforts and make adjustments as needed. What I'm hearing is that data is key, not just for understanding employee needs, but also for evaluating the success of well-being initiatives.
You got it. Measurement is key to continuous improvement.
Now that we know how to measure well-being, what are some concrete steps companies can take to actually improve it? What are the most effective strategies, particularly in the Middle Eastern context?
Well, there are a lot of great strategies out there, but I think some of the most effective ones focus on creating a supportive and flexible work environment.
Okay, that makes sense.
Like, for example, offering flexible work arrangements, providing access to mental health resources, and promoting a culture of open communication are all strategies that can be particularly impactful in the Middle East.
Okay, let's unpack each of those a bit.
Hmm.
Why is offering flexible work arrangements so crucial in the Middle East?
Well, as we've discussed, family and community ties are incredibly strong in this region.
Right. It's not unusual for people to have significant obligations outside of work.
Exactly, and allowing employees to work from home, adjust their hours, or take breaks when needed can help them better manage their personal obligations while still feeling valued and productive at work.
That makes perfect sense. It's about recognizing that work isn't always the top priority in people's lives and finding ways to integrate it with their other commitments.
Right.
What about access to mental health resources? Why is that particularly important in this region?
Well, there can be a stigma around mental health in some Middle Eastern cultures, which can prevent people from seeking help when they need it.
So companies need to be proactive in providing those resources and creating a culture where it's okay to use them.
Exactly. By offering counseling services, employee assistance programs, or other resources, companies can help destigmatize these issues and create a more supportive environment where employees feel comfortable seeking help when they need it.
So it's not just about providing the resources, it's about creating a culture where it's okay to use them.
Precisely. And that brings us to the importance of promoting open communication.
I'm listening.
Encouraging employees to talk openly about their challenges and concerns can help create a more understanding and empathetic work environment.
So it's about creating a safe space where people feel comfortable sharing their struggles and asking for help when they need it.
Exactly. And that can go a long way in reducing stress and promoting well-being.
Now, I know these strategies sound great in theory, but I'm wondering, do we have any evidence that they actually work in practice? Has ProtajHR shared any data or case studies that show the impact of these initiatives?
Unfortunately, their website doesn't delve into specific case studies or data points on this.
Too bad.
However, there's a growing body of research that supports the effectiveness of these well-being strategies in boosting employee engagement and productivity, not just in the Middle East, but globally.
So while we don't have ProtajHR's specific data, we can confidently say that these are strategies worth exploring for companies operating in the Middle East.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that these strategies are not mutually exclusive. They work best when implemented together, creating a holistic approach to employee well-being.
That's a great point. It's not about picking and choosing. It's about creating a comprehensive well-being strategy that addresses all aspects of the employee experience.
Exactly. It's about creating a workplace where employees feel supported, valued, and empowered to thrive.
Well said.
Exactly. It's about creating a workplace where employees feel supported, valued, and empowered to thrive.
Well said. Now, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about another key element of ProtajHR's approach: leadership development. They seem to really emphasize this based on the information on their website.
They do, and rightfully so, I think.
Why do you say that?
Well, they highlight the importance of equipping leaders with the skills and confidence they need to lead effectively and foster a positive work environment.
Right, and I imagine that's especially important in the Middle East, where leadership styles and expectations might be different from other parts of the world, right?
Absolutely. Cultural nuances play a big role in how leadership is perceived and practiced, and it seems like ProtajHR understands these nuances and tailors its leadership development programs accordingly.
They do. It's not just about teaching generic leadership skills. It's about understanding how those skills need to be adapted to the specific cultural context of the Middle East.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm really curious to dive deeper into this. What are some specific examples of how leadership styles and expectations might differ in the Middle East?
Well, one example is the concept of hierarchy.
How so?
In many Middle Eastern cultures, there's a strong emphasis on respecting authority and following the chain of command.
Okay.
So a leader who's used to a more collaborative, flat organizational structure might need to adjust their approach when working in the Middle East, where a more directive leadership style might be more effective.
Interesting. So it's not just about being a good leader, it's about being a culturally intelligent leader.
Exactly.
Are there any other cultural factors that come into play?
Of course. Relationship building is another key aspect of Middle Eastern culture. Leaders who take the time to build strong personal relationships with their team members are often seen as more trustworthy and effective.
So it's not just about getting the job done, it's about nurturing those personal connections.
Precisely. And this might involve things like socializing outside of work, showing genuine interest in your team members' lives, and understanding their family and community obligations.
This makes me think about our earlier discussion about employee well-being.
Yeah, I see the connection.
A leader who prioritizes relationships and understands the importance of family and community is likely to be more attuned to their employees' well-being, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's all connected. A holistic approach to leadership that considers the whole person, not just the employee, is often more effective in the Middle East.
Now I'm curious, how does ProtajHR actually go about developing leaders who can navigate these cultural nuances? What does their leadership development program look like?
Unfortunately, their website doesn't provide specific details about their program curriculum.
Okay, so we're back to playing detective.
But we can make some educated guesses based on their overall approach and the insights we've gathered so far.
All right, let's put on our detective hats again. What do you think they might focus on?
Well, I imagine they would emphasize cultural awareness training.
Makes sense.
Helping leaders understand the specific cultural values, beliefs, and behaviors that are relevant to their work context.
Right, so giving them a foundational understanding of the cultural landscape they're operating in.
Exactly. And beyond cultural awareness, I think they'd also provide communication skills training, equipping leaders with the skills to communicate effectively across cultures, taking into account different communication styles and expectations.
That's a crucial point, especially when you consider that communication styles can vary so much across different cultures.
They can.
A leader who's used to a very direct communication style might need to soften their approach when working in a culture where indirect communication is more common.
Precisely. And beyond communication, I think ProtajHR would also focus on conflict resolution training.
Interesting.
Providing leaders with the tools to resolve conflicts in a culturally sensitive way, respecting different perspectives and approaches to problem solving.
That's a critical skill for any leader, but especially in a cross-cultural context.
It is, and of course, team building activities would be important to help leaders build strong relationships with their team members and foster a sense of trust and collaboration.
Those are all great points.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine they would also provide coaching and mentorship to help leaders put these skills into practice in real-world situations.
Absolutely. Ongoing support is crucial for leadership development.
Right. It's not just about attending a training program. It's about applying those learnings and getting feedback along the way. Okay, so we've talked about how ProtajHR might approach leadership development, but I'm also curious about broader trends in this area that are relevant to the Middle East.
Yeah, good point.
Are there any global shifts in leadership thinking that are particularly relevant to this region?
There are. One trend that's becoming increasingly important globally, and particularly in the Middle East, is the focus on authentic leadership.
Ooh, that's a buzzword I've heard a lot lately. What does it actually mean in practice?
Essentially, it's about being true to yourself as a leader, leading with integrity, transparency, and vulnerability.
It's about being genuine and connecting with your team members on a human level.
Exactly.
I could see how that would be especially powerful in the Middle East, where personal relationships are so highly valued.
Absolutely. Authenticity builds trust and credibility, which are essential for effective leadership in any culture, but perhaps even more so in the Middle East.
And how does this idea of authentic leadership relate to the other cultural factors we've discussed, like hierarchy and relationship building? Is it possible to be both authentic and respectful of those cultural norms?
It is. It's not about abandoning those cultural norms, but rather about finding a way to lead authentically within those norms.
It's about striking a balance.
Exactly. It's about being respectful of authority while also being true to yourself and your values. It's about building strong relationships while also being genuine and transparent in your interactions.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where authenticity and cultural sensitivity intersect.
Precisely. It's about being true to yourself while also being respectful of the cultural context in which you're operating.
That's a really insightful way to put it. Now, you mentioned that authentic leadership is a growing trend globally, but is there anything specific about the Middle East that makes it particularly relevant to this region?
I think one factor is the rapid pace of change that's happening in the Middle East. Many of these countries are experiencing significant economic and social transformation, which can create a sense of uncertainty and instability for people.
So in times of change and uncertainty, people are looking for leaders who are grounded, trustworthy, and genuine.
Exactly. They're looking for leaders who they can believe in and who will guide them through these turbulent times.
And authentic leadership can provide that sense of stability and direction.
It can. When leaders are transparent about their vision, values, and intentions, it creates a sense of clarity and purpose for their followers.
And that can be incredibly empowering, especially in a rapidly changing environment.
Absolutely. It gives people a sense of control and agency, which can help them navigate change more effectively.
This makes me think about the millennial workforce and their expectations of leadership.
Oh, yeah, the millennials.
I've read a lot about how millennials value authenticity and transparency in their leaders.
That's right. And the millennial generation makes up a significant portion of the workforce in the Middle East.
So it's not just about adapting to the broader cultural context. It's also about understanding the specific values and expectations of different generations within the workforce.
Exactly. It's about being attuned to the nuances of both culture and generation.
That adds another layer of complexity to the leadership equation, doesn't it?
It does, but it's also what makes leadership so fascinating and challenging. It's about constantly adapting and evolving to meet the needs of your team and the demands of the environment.
Now, we've talked a lot about the importance of authentic leadership and cultural sensitivity, but are there any potential pitfalls that leaders need to be aware of when trying to strike this balance? Could focusing too much on authenticity lead to missteps or cultural misunderstandings?
Definitely. One potential pitfall is the risk of coming across as inauthentic or disingenuous.
How so?
Well, if leaders try too hard to fit in or adapt to a different culture, they might lose sight of their own values and principles, which can make them seem fake.
So it's about finding that balance between being adaptable and staying true to yourself.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's a delicate dance, but it's crucial for building trust and credibility.
Are there any other potential pitfalls that leaders should be aware of?
Another challenge is the risk of misinterpreting cultural cues or behaviors.
Oh, I can see how that could happen.
Yeah, it's easy to make assumptions or jump to conclusions based on your own cultural background, so it's important for leaders to be aware of their own cultural biases and to seek out feedback and guidance from people who are more familiar with the local culture.
So it's about being humble, being open to learning, and recognizing that you don't have all the answers when it comes to navigating a different culture.
Absolutely. Cultural sensitivity is a journey, not a destination. It's about being constantly curious, seeking to understand, and being willing to adjust your approach as you learn and grow.
Well said. I think that's a great note to end our discussion on leadership development. Before we move on to our next topic, I'd like to summarize the key takeaways for our listeners.
Sounds good.
So we've learned that effective leadership in the Middle East requires a deep understanding of the cultural context, a commitment to authenticity in relationship building, and a willingness to adapt and evolve as the business landscape continues to change.
Exactly. It's about being both culturally sensitive and strategically savvy.
Now, I know we've been focusing primarily on leadership in the Middle East, but I'm wondering, how transferable are these insights to other parts of the world? Are these principles only relevant in this specific region, or can we apply them more broadly?
That's a great question. I think many of these insights are applicable globally.
You do.
Absolutely. The importance of authenticity, relationship building, and cultural sensitivity are universal principles of effective leadership, no matter where you are in the world.
So it's not just about adapting to a specific culture. It's about developing a leadership style that is both adaptable and grounded in your core values.
Exactly. It's about being who you are while also being mindful of the cultural context in which you're operating.
Well said. Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground on the topic of leadership. Now, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about something that's closely related. Performance management.
Okay, performance management, a topic that's often met with groans, but it doesn't have to be that way.
I agree. It could be so much more than just annual reviews and dreaded feedback sessions.
Exactly.
We know that ProtajHR offers performance management programs, but I'm curious to explore how this aspect of employee engagement might look different in the Middle East.
Great. Performance management is a crucial aspect of employee engagement and a key driver of organizational success.
Right. And just like leadership, performance management might look different in the Middle East compared to other parts of the world.
Absolutely. Cultural norms and expectations can definitely influence how performance is measured, evaluated, and rewarded.
Exactly. And that's what makes this topic so fascinating.
It is, isn't it?
I'm intrigued. Give us some examples of how these cultural differences might play out in the workplace. Let's say I'm a manager who's used to getting very direct feedback.
Okay, the straight shooter approach.
Yeah, are there any cultural factors I should be aware of when managing a team in the Middle East?
Definitely. One area where we might see differences is in the area of feedback. In some cultures, direct feedback, even if it's constructive, can be seen as confrontational or disrespectful.
So a manager who's used to giving blunt, straightforward feedback might need to adjust their approach when working with employees from a culture where indirect communication is more common.
Exactly. It's about being mindful of how your words and actions might be perceived and finding ways to deliver feedback in a way that is both honest and respectful.
That makes sense. So what are some strategies for giving effective feedback in a culturally sensitive way?
Well, one strategy is to focus on the behavior, not the person.
Okay.
Instead of saying, you're not meeting deadlines, you might say, I've noticed that some deadlines have been missed lately. Is there anything I can do to support you in meeting those deadlines?
That's a great example. It frames the feedback in a more objective and collaborative way, rather than feeling like a personal attack.
Exactly. And it opens up a dialogue rather than shutting it down.
Now, beyond feedback, are there other areas of performance management that might be influenced by cultural factors?
Absolutely. Another key area is goal setting.
How so?
In some cultures, goals might be set more collaboratively with input from both the manager and the employee.
So it's not just about the manager dictating the goals, it's about working together to create something that both parties feel invested in.
Precisely. And this collaborative approach can be very effective in building buy-in and motivation.
Now, this makes me think about the cultural value of relationships that we discussed earlier.
Yeah, the connection is definitely there.
If those relationships are strong,
Yeah.
it makes sense that goal setting would be a more collaborative process, right?
Exactly. It's all connected. When there's trust and mutual respect between the manager and the employee, performance management becomes less about control and more about collaboration and growth.
I love that. It shifts the whole dynamic from a top-down approach to a more partnership-oriented model.
That's the beauty of cultural sensitivity. It can lead to more effective and human-centered approaches to management.
Okay, so we've talked about feedback and goal setting. Are there any other areas of performance management where we might see cultural differences?
Well, another area is recognition and rewards.
How so?
What motivates employees in one culture might not be as effective in another.
Give us some examples. What might those differences look like?
Well, in some cultures, public recognition might be very motivating, while in others it might be seen as embarrassing or inappropriate.
Oh.
Or in some cultures, financial rewards might be the primary motivator, while in others, non-monetary rewards like extra vacation time or opportunities for professional development might be more valued.
So it's about understanding what truly motivates your employees and at tailoring your recognition and reward system accordingly.
Exactly. It's about making sure that your efforts to recognize and reward performance are aligned with the values and expectations of your workforce.
Now, this makes me wonder, how does ProtajHR approach performance management in the Middle East? Do they have any specific strategies or insights that they share on their website?
Unfortunately, they don't go into a lot of detail on their website about their specific approach to performance management.
All right, back to our detective work.
Right. But based on their overall emphasis on tailored solutions and cultural sensitivity, we can assume that they take a very nuanced approach.
Okay, let's put on our detective hats again. What do you think their approach might entail?
Well, I imagine they would work closely with their clients to understand the specific cultural norms and expectations around performance management in their organization.
Okay.
They would then develop performance management systems that are aligned with those norms, taking into account factors like communication styles, feedback preferences, and reward systems.
Makes sense.
And of course, they would train managers on how to give effective feedback, set goals collaboratively, and recognize and reward performance in a culturally sensitive way.
Those are all great points. And it really emphasizes the importance of customization and taking a data-driven approach to performance management.
It does.
What works for one company might not work for another, even within the same industry or region.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all solution for performance management. It's about finding what works best for your specific organization and your specific workforce.
Now, before we wrap up our discussion on performance management, I want to touch on one more important aspect: the role of technology.
Ah, yes, technology. Can't forget about that.
We know that technology is transforming the way performance is managed in workplaces around the world, but I'm curious to explore how this is playing out in the Middle East.
Great point. Technology is transforming the way performance is managed in workplaces around the world, and the Middle East is no exception.
So what are some of the ways that technology is being used to enhance performance management in the region?
Well, one way is through the use of performance management software.
Oh, those systems that everyone loves to hate.
Yeah, but they can actually be really helpful when used effectively.
How so?
Well, these platforms allow companies to track goals, provide feedback, and conduct performance reviews all in one central location.
So it's about streamlining the process and making it more efficient.
Exactly. And it can also make it easier to gather data and track progress over time.
That makes sense. And I imagine this data can be really valuable for making informed decisions about performance management strategies.
Absolutely. Data can help companies identify areas where their performance management systems are working well and areas where they need improvement.
Now, beyond performance management software, are there other ways that technology is being used to enhance performance in the Middle East?
Yes. Another trend we're seeing is the use of mobile technology for performance management.
Oh, interesting. So managers and employees can access performance information and give feedback on the go.
Exactly. This can be especially helpful in industries where employees are often on the move, such as sales, retail, or hospitality.
That's a great point. It makes performance management more flexible and accessible.
And it can help create a culture of continuous feedback, rather than just relying on annual performance reviews.
Now, while technology can certainly be a powerful tool for performance management, I imagine there are also some potential challenges or pitfalls to be aware of.
Definitely. One potential challenge is the risk of becoming too reliant on technology and losing sight of the human element of performance management.
So it's not just about plugging numbers into a system. It's about using technology to facilitate meaningful conversations and support employee growth.
Exactly. Technology should enhance performance management, not replace it.
And are there any other potential pitfalls to be aware of?
Well, another challenge is the risk of data privacy and security breaches.
Oh, right. Especially with all this sensitive information being stored online.
Exactly. When sensitive performance data is stored online, it's important to ensure that it's protected from unauthorized access.
So companies need to be thoughtful about their data security practices and make sure they're complying with relevant regulations.
Absolutely. Data security is a top priority, especially when dealing with sensitive employee information.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground on the topic of performance management in the Middle East.
We have.
Before we wrap up this segment, I want to recap the key takeaways for our listeners.
Okay, go for it.
So, we've learned that performance management in the Middle East is often influenced by cultural norms and expectations.
Right.
And that it's important to be mindful of these factors when designing performance management systems, giving feedback, setting goals, and recognizing and rewarding performance.
Exactly. And we've also discussed the role of technology in performance management, highlighting both the opportunities and the challenges that it presents.
Now, before we move on to our next topic, I want to ask you a broader question about performance management.
Sure.
We've talked a lot about how it's evolving and how technology is playing a role in that evolution.
It is a rapidly changing landscape.
It is, but I'm curious, what do you see as the future of performance management? What are some of the key trends that you're watching?
That's a great question. I think one of the biggest trends we're seeing is a shift away from traditional annual performance reviews.
Really? Those are going out of style.
They seem to be, and toward more continuous feedback and development.
So it's about having more frequent conversations about performance rather than just one big evaluation at the end of the year.
Exactly. And this shift is being driven by a number of factors, including the need for greater agility and responsiveness in today's fast-paced business environment.
That makes sense. Annual reviews can feel a bit outdated in a world where things are changing so rapidly.
They can. And continuous feedback allows for more timely course correction and helps employees stay on track with their goals.
Now, beyond continuous feedback, are there any other trends in performance management that you're excited about?
I am. Another trend I'm seeing is a greater focus on employee development and coaching. Performance management is no longer just about evaluating past performance. It's about helping employees grow and develop their skills for the future.
So it's about shifting from a judgment-oriented approach to a more developmental one.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture of continuous learning and improvement.
I love that. It makes performance management feel less like a chore and more like an opportunity for growth.
It does. And I think this shift is really positive. When employees feel like their company is invested in their development, they're more likely to be engaged and motivated.
Well said. Now, before we move on to our final topic, I want to connect this back to ProtajHR and their work in the Middle East. Do you think these trends in performance management are relevant to that region?
Absolutely. The Middle East is a dynamic and evolving region, and companies there are just as eager as companies anywhere else to embrace new approaches to performance management that can help them attract and retain top talent.
So even though cultural norms might influence how these trends are implemented, the underlying principles are still relevant.
Exactly. It's about finding a way to adapt these global trends to the specific cultural context of the Middle East.
And that takes us back to ProtajHR's emphasis on tailored solutions. Yeah. It's not about imposing a one-size-fits-all approach. It's about understanding the nuances of the local culture and adapting your strategies accordingly.
That's right. And that's why their expertise in the Middle Eastern market is so valuable.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground on the topic of performance management. Now I want to shift gears and talk about our final topic for today, employee recognition.
Great. Employee recognition is a powerful tool for boosting morale, motivation, and engagement.
And I imagine that, just like the other topics we've discussed, employee recognition might look different in the Middle East compared to other parts of the world.
Absolutely. What's considered appropriate and motivating in one culture might not be in another.
So what are some examples of how cultural differences might influence employee recognition practices? Let's say I'm a manager who's used to giving shout-outs in team meetings or posting congratulations on a company bulletin board. Are there any cultural factors I should be aware of if I'm managing a team in the Middle East?
That's a great question. One example is the level of formality. In some cultures, recognition might be more formal and structured, with award ceremonies or written letters of appreciation. In other cultures, recognition might be more informal and spontaneous, with a simple thank you or a pat on the back.
Interesting. So a manager who's used to a more formal approach to recognition might need to loosen up a bit when working in a culture where informality is more valued.
Exactly. It's about adapting your style to the cultural context. And in the Middle East, where relationships are so important, a more personal and heartfelt approach to recognition might be more effective than a highly structured or formal one.
That makes sense. It's about showing genuine appreciation rather than just going through the motions. Now, beyond formality, are there other cultural factors that might influence employee recognition? You mentioned that public recognition might not always be appropriate. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. Another important factor is the type of reward that is most motivating. In some cultures, public recognition might be very appreciated, while in others it might be seen as embarrassing or boastful.
So a manager who's used to giving shout-outs in team meetings or posting congratulations on a company bulletin board might need to rethink their approach when working in a culture where public displays of recognition are not the norm.
Exactly. It's about being sensitive to the cultural norms around praise and recognition.
Now, beyond public versus private recognition, are there other types of rewards that might be more or less effective in different cultures? For example, are financial rewards always the best way to recognize employees? Or are there other types of rewards that might be more meaningful in the Middle East?
That's a great question. In some cultures, tangible rewards like bonuses or gifts might be highly motivating, but in others, intangible rewards like opportunities for professional development or greater autonomy might be more valued.
So it's about understanding what truly motivates your employees and tailoring your recognition and reward system accordingly.
Exactly. It's about making sure that your efforts to recognize and reward performance are aligned with the values and expectations of your workforce.
This makes me think about our earlier discussions about tailoring solutions to the specific cultural context and the importance of understanding employee needs. It seems like employee recognition isn't a one-size-fits-all approach.
It definitely isn't. What might be seen as a great reward in one culture might not be as well received in another. For example, in some Middle Eastern cultures, offering an employee a gift certificate to a spa might be seen as inappropriate, whereas providing them with the opportunity to attend a prestigious industry conference could be highly valued.
That's a great example. It highlights how important it is to do your research and understand the specific cultural nuances of the region you're operating in.
Absolutely. And it's not just about avoiding cultural faux pas. It's about making sure that your recognition efforts are actually motivating and meaningful to your employees.
Now, this makes me wonder, how does ProtajHR approach employee recognition in the Middle East? Do they have any specific strategies or insights that they share on their website?
Unfortunately, they don't go into a lot of detail on their website about their specific approach to employee recognition, but based on their overall emphasis on tailored solutions and cultural sensitivity, we can assume that they take a very nuanced approach.
Okay, let's put on our detective hats again.
Yeah.
What do you think their approach might entail?
Well, I imagine they would work closely with their clients to understand the specific cultural norms and expectations around employee recognition in their organization. They would then develop recognition programs that are aligned with those norms, taking into account factors like formality, public versus private recognition, and types of rewards. And of course, they would train managers on how to recognize and reward employees in a culturally sensitive way.
Those are all great points. And it really emphasizes the importance of customization and taking a data-driven approach to employee recognition. What works for one company might not work for another, even within the same industry or region.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all solution for employee recognition. It's about finding what works best for your specific organization and your specific workforce.
Now, before we wrap up our discussion on employee recognition, I want to touch on one more important aspect, the role of technology. We know that technology is transforming the way employees are recognized and rewarded in workplaces around the world, but I'm curious to explore how this is playing out in the Middle East.
Great point. Technology is transforming the way employees are recognized and rewarded in workplaces around the world, and the Middle East is no exception.
So what are some of the ways that technology is being used to enhance employee recognition in the region?
Well, one way is through the use of employee recognition platforms. These platforms allow companies to create online recognition programs where employees can give each other points, badges, or other forms of recognition for a job well done.
So it's like a social media platform for employee recognition.
Exactly. And it can be a great way to boost morale and create a culture of appreciation.
And I imagine these platforms can also be helpful for tracking recognition and making sure that it's distributed fairly and equitably.
Absolutely. Data can help companies identify employees who are going above and beyond and make sure they're being recognized for their contributions.
Now, beyond recognition platforms, are there other ways that technology is being used to enhance employee recognition in the Middle East?
Yes. Another trend we're seeing is the use of mobile technology for employee recognition.
Interesting. So managers and employees can give recognition on the go.
Exactly. This can be especially helpful in industries where employees are often on the move, such as sales, retail, or hospitality.
That's a great point. It makes employee recognition more spontaneous and timely. No more waiting for a formal meeting or a performance review to express your appreciation. You can give recognition right then and there when it matters most.
Precisely. And that can make a big difference in terms of boosting morale and motivation.
Now, while technology can certainly be a powerful tool for employee recognition, I imagine there are also some potential challenges or pitfalls to be aware of.
Absolutely. One potential challenge is the risk of becoming too reliant on technology and losing sight of the human element of recognition.
So it's not just about sending a virtual high five or awarding points on a platform. It's about taking the time to connect with employees on a personal level and express your appreciation in a genuine and meaningful way.
Exactly. Recognition should be personal and authentic. It's about making employees feel seen, valued, and appreciated for their contributions.
And are there any other potential pitfalls to be aware of?
Well, another challenge is the risk of recognition becoming too transactional.
Ooh, interesting. What do you mean by that?
Well, if employees feel like they're only being recognized when they hit certain metrics or achieve specific goals, it can start to feel less like genuine appreciation and more like a quid pro quo.
So it's about recognizing effort and contributions, not just outcomes.
Exactly. Recognition should be about celebrating the journey, not just the destination.
That's a really insightful way to put it. Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground on the topic of employee recognition in the Middle East. Before we wrap up this episode, I want to recap the key takeaways for our listeners.
Sounds good.
So we've learned that employee recognition in the Middle East is often influenced by cultural norms and expectations, and that it's important to be mindful of these factors when designing recognition programs, giving praise, and choosing rewards.
Exactly. We've also discussed the role of technology in employee recognition, highlighting both the opportunities and the challenges that it presents.
Now, before we sign off, I want to leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question. We've talked a lot about how ProtajHR tailors its approach to the specific cultural context of the Middle East. But I'm curious, what are some universally applicable principles of employee recognition that companies can adopt, regardless of their location or industry? Are there any fundamental truths about recognition that transcend cultural boundaries?
That's a great question. I think one universal principle is the importance of being timely with your recognition. Don't wait for an annual review or a special occasion to acknowledge someone's hard work. Recognize contributions as they happen so that employees feel appreciated in the moment.
So it's about making recognition a regular part of your company culture, not just a once-a-year event.
Exactly. Another universal principle is the importance of being specific with your praise. Instead of just saying, "Good job," take the time to highlight the specific actions or behaviors that you appreciate.
So instead of saying, "Great work on that presentation," you might say, "I really appreciated how you clearly articulated the key takeaways and engaged the audience with your visuals."
Exactly. The more specific you are, the more meaningful the recognition will be.
That's a great tip. And are there any other universal principles of recognition that come to mind?
I think another important principle is to be sincere with your recognition. Don't just go through the motions or say things that you don't really mean. Employees can spot insincerity a mile away.
So it's about making sure that your recognition comes from a genuine place of appreciation.
Exactly. When recognition is authentic, it can have a powerful impact on employee morale and motivation.
Well said. Okay, I think those are some great takeaways for our listeners, regardless of where they are in the world. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. It's been a fascinating deep dive into the world of employee engagement in the Middle East.
My pleasure. It's always rewarding to explore these topics and share insights that can help companies create more engaged and fulfilling workplaces.
And to our listeners, thanks for diving in with us. We hope this episode has given you a deeper understanding of the complexities of employee engagement in the Middle East and inspired you to think more critically about your own approach to engaging and motivating your workforce.
Until next time, keep exploring
and keep diving deep.